Hi, good morning and afternoon, everyone. This is Lisa Schechtman from USAID. I just wanted to welcome you and let you know that we will get started in just a couple minutes. It looks like we have a lot of people coming on right now, so we'll just be on mute for another couple minutes to give people a chance to join. Good morning, everyone. I think we will go ahead and get started. I am going to be your moderator / introducer to this great webinar. My name is Lisa Schechtman, and I'm the Senior Policy and Partnerships Advisor in USAID's Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene. Thank you so much for joining us today for this really awesome webinar hosted by USAID's Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Partnerships and Learning for Sustainability activity called Wash Pals, and particularly to our key partners that you'll be hearing from today from Tetra Tech and Iris Group. The first thing we'd like to do is put a poll up just to get a little bit more information about you. We hope that we have people from all over the world and from lots of different sectors reflecting the really important cross-section of menstrual hygiene and all the different sectors that need to come together. So if you could just take a second to please respond to the poll on your screen, and then we'll really formally get started. Great. So it's a really interesting result. It looks like mostly wash, which we tend to expect, but really thrilled to see important voices here from health, education, economic development, and other sectors that we didn't even list. So I think this is important to keep in mind as we talk about menstrual hygiene, because all of these sectors are so important. So I'm going to just go through a little bit of housekeeping logistical information just to make sure everyone understands how to use this platform. First, let me pause and say happy Menstrual Hygiene Day. We're thrilled that you've decided to spend some of it with us, and I hope that you are going out into the world and shouting about menstrual dignity and equal access to information and supplies. Just a couple of things to know about the GoToWebinar platform. First, there's a Q&A box at the bottom on the right side of the screen where your menu option is. There's a Q&A box. Feel free to submit questions in that box at any time during the presentations. And then they will be kind of stored up to be responded to at the end of the presentations. If you have any technical issues, Grace and Dan are the webinar technical team. You can find them in the chat box or put something in the Q&A box to see if you have any questions for them, if you need technical support. I also need to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording next week. You can find the slides and other documents from today's presentation in the handouts tab in your webinar menu section. And the recording and resources will all be available on globalwaters.org. So again, just please, a reminder, use the questions. We want to engage with you. Reach out to Dan or Grace if you have technical issues. And thanks again for joining. I'm going to dive in now to the reason you're all here. We're really thrilled to be able to talk about a part of menstrual hygiene that we often don't talk about, aligned with this year's theme for Menstrual Hygiene Day, It's Time for Action. So as I mentioned in welcoming you, the webinar is being hosted by USAID's Wash Pals activity, which is implemented by Tetra Tech and Iris Group. Wash Pals carries out research on sanitation and hygiene issues to try and help all of our communities better understand the challenges and possible solutions. Menstrual hygiene management is a cross-sectoral issue, and it has gained a lot of attention and traction in recent years. But we all know that that energy and investment has largely focused on WASH in schools. This creates two major challenges. The first is it focuses only on girls who are in school, so it misses out-of-school girls and adult menstruators. We also know that WASH is necessary but insufficient to actually address the full scope of menstrual health and hygiene needs. So Wash Pals took an intentional decision to focus on these gaps to really try to contribute to the global knowledge base on the issue. MHM in the workplace is a really understudied topic, and you'll hear a lot more about that. The first thing that they tried to do was to understand what was out there, and the answer was not much. Again, because the focus has generally been on WASH in schools. Women in the workplace and MHM in the workplace has a huge link to overall well-being and economic development and prospects for women. And so the project is really seeking to generate evidence on how improved MHM in the workplace might lead to economic empowerment for women, but it's also seeking to build a business case for MHM in the workplace. Next slide, please. So in front of you, you see the speakers that we're going to be hearing from shortly. Aditi Krishna is Research Director at the Iris Group. Whitney Fry, who is a Senior Associate and Regional Advisor for the MHM activity in East Africa. And Maneshka Eliatambi, Senior Associate and a Regional Advisor also in Asia. So I'm going to now stop talking and get into the depth of the discussion by handing it over to Aditi. Thank you again for joining us, and happy MH Day.
Thanks very much, Lisa, for the kind introductions. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to the webinar. We're very excited to be here sharing this work with you. And just to flag that we're only partway through the work, so that we hope that in the coming months we can reconvene and share our updated findings with you all. Next slide, please. So before we really dive in, I just want to give an overview of where we're going with this webinar. So I'll give a very high-level overview of the findings from the desk review, leaving those of you who are interested to peruse the entire document linked at the bottom of the GoToWebinar application. Then I'll hand it over to my colleagues to talk about the project background and the findings from the formative research to date in Nepal. And we'll conclude with a question and discussion section at the end, in which we'll answer the questions that you can keep posing in the question box in the application. Next slide, please. To start us off, I just wanted to discuss a definition of adequate menstrual hygiene management, or MHM, that we'll be using throughout this presentation and throughout our work. So this definition refers to the awareness, information, and self-confidence regarding menstrual hygiene, as well as access to safe, hygienic, absorbent materials or products and supplies. So this refers to pads as well as to underwear. Access to safe and clean facilities that have water and soap to bathe oneself, and clean or dispose of materials. And lastly, and importantly, a supportive environment that allows women and girls to manage their periods without fear of stigma or embarrassment. So this is a definition that has been crafted by experts. It's used in the joint monitoring program implemented by the WHO and UNICEF. And as I mentioned, it's the one that we're going to be using. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I just wanted to delve into the findings from the desk review. Next slide, please. The methodology that we used was a combination of a systematic review of the peer-reviewed literature, the journal articles that have been published, a comprehensive search of the gray literature, so delving into project briefs, reports, things that are out there as well, and then a select set of key informant interviews with experts in this area, in the areas of MHM and in WASH and gender. And we integrated the findings from these three streams of research into the desk review report. Next slide, please. So from the descriptive evidence, from the studies looking at women's experiences in the workplace, we found that in general, women experience poor WASH and MHM conditions, not only in the workplace, but also at home. And the key challenges are that they experience difficulties in changing their menstrual products and often go all day without changing their products. Women preferred to stay at home while menstruating or to leave work early. And it was more challenging for women who worked in particular sectors, such as in construction or for seasonal migrant workers, or women working in marketplaces or other informal workplaces where there may not be any facilities. However, even in formal workplaces where there were toilets, they may be of mixed gender, they may be unclean or unsafe, or a lack of water. And another set of challenges refers to requiring permissions from supervisors to use toilets during working hours. For women living on site in dormitories, fearing gender-based violence when they used poorly lit toilets late in the evening. And then, of course, the issue of disposal for non-reusable products. Next slide, please. So I wanted to discuss the implications of poor MHM, and we categorize them into three buckets, referring to the economic bucket of outcomes. It was lost wages due to missing work or due to leaving work early. And not only did women risk losing wages, they also risked being scolded by supervisors for taking leave. And then Absenteeism, which as I mentioned was missing work, and then presenteeism, which refers to a diminished ability to concentrate or diminished performance at work related to menstruation. In addition to these economic implications, there's also implications related to empowerment. And this evidence we really gleaned from some of the literature with schoolgirls. As Lisa mentioned, much of the work has been done with MHM in schools. And this work found that poor MHM is associated with a lower sense of dignity, self-confidence, and a perception of mobility for girls. In terms of health outcomes, we did not find anything specific to working women, and in general, the evidence here is pretty sparse. But there is limited evidence that inadequate MHM may lead to gender-based violence, as I already mentioned, to reproductive and urinary tract infections, and to increased psychosocial stress due to sanitation insecurity. In the next two slides, I'm going to discuss the few interventions and programs that exist to address this issue. So one category is menstrual leave laws and policies. And this refers to policies that are implemented either at the national level in countries like Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and Indonesia, as well as company-wide policies that are implemented largely in private workplaces. So there are very few of these. The 4 countries that are cited are the only ones to our knowledge that have these laws. And even when they do exist, the implementation and enforcement of these laws is very challenging. In Indonesia, women who worked during while menstruating were paid overtime for doing so. So there are financial incentives not to take leave. Women also feared taking this leave while menstruating because they had to request permission from their supervisors, which, as I mentioned, is challenging. And they, in certain cases, had to prove that they were menstruating. Additionally, menstrual leave laws and policies truly do not address the intersectional nature of MHM. They don't address the lack and inadequacy of facilities and lack of access to products. And furthermore, they do not address the stigma and taboos that surround menstruation. Next slide, please. So in complement to these laws and policies, there are also several ongoing initiatives implemented by collaboration between the private sector and NGOs. So 3 of these that are notable are the ones cited here: Business for Social Responsibility's HER Project, SNV's Working with Women Too, and GAP Inc.'s PACE program. All 3 use a peer-to-peer health education model, of which MHM is one component of a larger health education platform. The only one that has been rigorously evaluated to date is the HER project. And results show that in Pakistan, 33% of women use sanitary napkins at the conclusion of the intervention. There was a reduction in absenteeism, a reduction in poor concentration, and less difficulty in meeting production targets as well. And the last 2 are related to the presenteeism that I mentioned earlier. So there are promising results there. Next slide, please. But in general, there's, as you've seen through my presentation, as Lisa mentioned, there's very little evidence linking MHM to women's economic empowerment or economic outcomes for women. And there's even fewer interventions or programs addressing MHM in the workplace. The 2 notable examples are the ones that I discussed here. And so the picture to the right is the cover of our desk review report, and I encourage you all to go investigate it for further details. And this has really helped set the stage for what we're hoping to do through our intervention, which I'll now hand over to my colleague Whitney to give an overview of the project background.
Thanks so much, Aditi. We can move on to the next slide. So indeed, understanding this evidence is a great backdrop to what we'd like to next share with everyone today, and that's the overall project background. Next slide, please. This diagram here was developed in response to the desk review findings, and it represents our overall conceptual framework for the workplace MHM action research. Our aim here is to best understand what influence MHM has on women's economic empowerment and private sector revenue streams, so the far left to the far right of this diagram. And we imagine that MHM would impact women in various ways, perhaps related to stigma, comfort at work, advancement potential. And we also imagine MHM to influence businesses related to items such as staff turnover, potential errors in production, and even recruitment. And then there's this area in the middle of shared impacts, those that would affect both women and the workforce, such as absenteeism, performance, and job satisfaction. So we sought out to understand these various components. And moving on to the next slide, we can see here our overall objective and primary research questions that were to best understand these outcome indicators from the previous slide. So our main aim here is to determine if providing adequate MHM in the workplace will contribute to improved business and social outcomes, including women's economic empowerment. And our first research question there on the far left seeks to understand the social and financial costs and benefits of adequate MHM in workplace settings. Our second research question, the one in the middle, intends to tease out the various factors related to implementing MHM interventions in the workplace. So for example, what best influences and contributes to adequate MHM in a variety of settings. Research question 3 is all about measurement, which is a big area of inquiry for those of us working in MHM. How can we best measure adequate MHM in the workplace and contribute to the body of evidence around these metrics broadly? Next slide, please. We've selected 4 countries for our action research: Nepal, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And we intend to partner with 1 or possibly 2 companies in each of these countries. We used a set criteria to assist us in selecting these partners. So first we were looking for medium to large size enterprises, at least 100 employees. And we were looking in the formal sector, which is an important distinction here as opposed to the informal sector. We wanted a company with at least 50 women, and the majority of whom had not completed secondary school and were not currently in managerial positions. We were also looking for permanent workplace settings with existing WASH infrastructure, but no ongoing MHM programs or women's economic empowerment efforts. And this was to avoid conflating the impact of our own intervention. Finally, we were looking for urban and peri-urban location settings. So as you can see from this slide, we've identified and begun partnering with companies in 3 of our countries, and we'll soon identify a company in Nigeria, our 4th country. Next slide, please. So what will we do? Well, as action research, we will enter into each of our businesses with a customized intervention to improve MHM in the workplace. Each company's intervention will be unique to its needs and context as determined by formative research activities, and we'll hear more about that in our Nepal case study. These interventions will be developed in close collaboration with the partner companies themselves. And before we begin any activities, we will draw up a partnership agreement that spells out the details of our intervention and how we intend to work together. At the basic level, though, all interventions will include menstrual products and disposal, and additional intervention elements may include any of these 3 that you see here. So firstly, potentially improved infrastructure. So perhaps we'll identify opportunities for private sector investments in MHM-friendly infrastructure, or possibly we'll work in social and behavior change efforts such as trainings or engaging men in MHM education. And thirdly, workplace policies. So this may include influencing leave or break times, or infusing MHM into workplace health and safety programs. Next slide, please. What really sets apart this study is our particular interest in the cost-benefit analysis of these improvements. We want to find out whether we can make a business case for improving MHM in workplace settings, both financially and socially. For example, do the benefits of our intervention, both for the company and for the women, outweigh the costs of our intervention? So we'll be diving into the CBA in detail to understand whether and how adequate MHM benefits women's economic empowerment and business revenue streams. Moving on to my next slide, we can see the project timeline. So we started off with each country to select country and partnership selection processes, and this is where we are in Nigeria currently. Next, we will and are conducting formative research activities to determine the customized intervention for our partner companies, and we're about to begin this in Ethiopia, and we're currently underway with formative research in Kenya. Following the formative research, we'll design the intervention and conduct a baseline to benchmark our intervention findings down the road. And following the baseline, we'll launch the intervention. We're at this stage currently in Nepal, and we're ready to begin baseline activities once COVID restrictions lift. So we'll intervene for 12 months and then conduct routine process monitoring along the way and conclude with a rigorous end line and dissemination of learnings. I'd like to take a minute here before we hear about the efforts in Nepal to talk about our sustainability considerations. You might be wondering what happens after our inline and learning dissemination. We've found in our country meetings that stakeholders are really excited about this project, and we think our findings could be utilized and even carried out in our research through their efforts on the ground, whether business associations working directly with private sector entities or policymakers who influence decision-making on a number of levels. And we're calling these stakeholders sustainability partners. And we plan to keep them informed about our learnings every step of the way so they can pick up and best serve their own interests when our timeline is finished. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next polling question. We have a second polling question for everyone. So I'd like to direct your attention to the screen that will pop up before you and for you to participate. Does your workplace, so now we're asking you, does your workplace adequately address the needs of people who menstruate? And you can select here, yes, somewhat, no, or I don't know. Looks like the responses are coming in, and we're seeing some interesting results here. Just a couple more seconds. Okay, I think we can look at the results now. Really, really great. It looks like 45% of you said yes, your workplace does adequately address these needs. 33% said somewhat, 13% no, 9% I don't know. This is really motivating for us in our work to see so many workplaces that do address these issues. So we are going to, with that, move forward. Thank you all for your participation. My colleague Maneshka will share about the Nepal case study. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Whitney. Next slide, please. In Nepal, we're proposing to partner with Shangri-La Carpets, a family-owned handmade luxury carpet manufacturer in Kathmandu. The company employs about 50 females and 80 males from diverse ethnic, religious, and caste backgrounds, and they're from various parts of Nepal. Most have little to no formal education. The company has a rich history of engaging in corporate social responsibility. For the last 25 years, it has provided housing for employees and their families, childcare, schooling, and milk for employees' children, a weekly doctor's visit, and food rations during the COVID-19 lockdown. Next slide, please. Next. We carried out formative research in Nepal over a 3-week period in February and March of 2020. Our 2 local consultants, Meena Sharma and Prakash Lutel, joined our CBA consultant, Christopher Magamba, and me for this task. The objectives of the research were to understand 4 specific things: women's MHM experiences, social norms and behaviors related to MHM in Nepal, women's ability to access and afford MHM products, all of this when at the workplace especially, and then also national and workplace MHM policies. For this, we spoke with 48 key informants and carried out 5 focus groups. The team, as you can see in this picture, carried out daily coding of findings, and developed a research wall, which allowed us to identify 10 major themes amongst our findings. Next slide, please. The first theme that emerged was around infrastructure. Most toilet infrastructure in Nepal lacks basic MHM facilities, including privacy, proper water supply, disposal bins and systems, toilet paper, and a place to hang clothes. Most women do not have on-site access to menstrual hygiene products and wait to go back to their homes to change their sanitary napkins. The factory that we propose to work at, the management have taken initiative and built new toilets that include water connections. However, what we found was that many of the women and men on staff lack knowledge regarding proper use of these toilets. Next slide, please. MHM products. There are several sanitary pad manufacturing companies in Nepal, and both local and imported products are available in the market. However, many low-income women cannot afford the required number of pads, and only women from elite communities use tampons and cups. When it comes to MHM disposal, most women throw sanitary waste out with regular trash or burn their sanitary waste. Some even confess that they throw their pads over the hillside or into the river system. There is one company called Mitra Samaj that collects sanitary waste and disposes of it. We also found that the Nepal government is paying a great deal of attention to MHM. There is a dignified menstruation bill currently in Parliament that they hope to pass in 2020. The government passed an MHM in schools policy in 2019 that provides sanitary pads to all schoolgirls. Chow gats in many locations have been destroyed in attempts to curb chowpatty, a practice where girls are sent out of their homes during their period. As a result of this attention in recent years, a number of new actors have emerged in both the local and the INGO spaces. The MHM Alliance of Nepal was established 4 years ago and now includes 60 partner organizations. City and village councils are leading the charge on MHM in schools. Workplace policies, while there aren't too many workplace policies that are formally in place, there are some local organizations and private companies that have piloted MHM programs. These include Nepal CRS Company and the Sarda Group. Next slide, please. The leadership of these companies noted that they feel that providing MHM products has helped with staff morale. However, as Whitney pointed out, not much has been done as far as finding out about the financial and social cost benefits of these initiatives. On MHM health and hygiene, according to our medical officials that we spoke with, lack of proper menstrual hygiene leads to ascending infections, UTIs, uterine prolapse, and numerous gynecological issues, including inability to bear children. These inappropriate MHM practices include lack of hygiene during menstruation and keeping sanitary napkins on all day. Next slide, please. Our research also revealed a number of social norms that guide behaviors in Nepali society. It is important for us to note here, though, that not all of these norms are practiced universally across Nepal. Nepal is a country of 126 ethnic groups with as many as 123 languages, and is certainly not a homogeneous society. The first norm that came up was around period blood. Period blood is often considered unclean and impure, as is the individual who is menstruating. As a result, it is important that the female body is purified by dispelling period blood from the body each month. It is believed that bathing reduces blood flow, and because of this, many women in some cultures do not bathe during their period. Some women believe that period pain is communicable and that it can only be cured by a witch doctor. Others believe that God will punish those who wear underwear, and as a result, some women tie their petticoats around their waist to catch period blood. There is a culture of silence around menstruation, which perpetuates the deep level of fear and ignorance around it. Menstruation is also seen as a woman's issue, despite the fact that men often control purse strings and women's ability to access MHM products and services. Some ethnic and religious groups believe that women on their period will pollute whatever they touch, including the shrine room, kitchen utensils, fruits and vegetables. During a conversation that happened around 4 p.m., one of the women confessed that she had not yet eaten that day as she was on her period. She was waiting on her son to come back home so that he could serve her food. In some Bahun and Kshetri communities, the husband of the menstruating woman is also considered impure and is restricted from engaging in certain religious activities. Next slide, please. Our overall findings suggest that we should address the issues of dignity, agency, and power in this specific case in Nepal. Next slide, please. After much discussion, we decided to go with the proposed title of Maryadit Karyas Bill, which builds on the dignified menstruation language shift that is being pursued in Nepal, as well as the bill that is currently in Parliament. The proposed intervention will have 3 components: products and infrastructure, social norms and behavior change, and workplace policies and guidance. Next slide, please. For products, we have chosen to go with 2, 70 to 90% disposable sanitary pad produced by Jasmine Hygiene out of Biratnagar in Nepal, and reusable sanitary pads also produced in Nepal. These products will be provided free of charge to women. The project will also make a number of recommendations with regards to improving toilet infrastructure. An infrastructure assessment will first be carried out, and then we will make recommendations based on the findings. Some of these could be including a privacy wall and including disposal bins in the toilets. Next slide, please. Design element 2 is on social norms and behavior change. 4 tools will be developed in this regard. The first is the Period Mythbusters menstrual playing cards. This leverages Nepal's playing card culture. The second is a period education snakes and ladders game. This has been tried and tested in many other contexts, including neighboring India. The third is information education communication materials. Those are IEC materials, including posters which will be placed on the back of toilet doors. All of these materials will be fun and interactive, and we will leverage local artists from different cultural backgrounds within Nepal who will design the materials. We will also develop a 3 to 4 episode video entertainment, which will be developed to educate women and men about proper menstrual hygiene. Next slide, please. Design element 3 will work on developing MHM language to be included in workplace policies and guidance. One of these could be a period inclusion guide. Next slide, please. Our proposed intervention will not just work with the women alone. We found during our formative research that there are several groups of influences in the lives of these women. They include family members and local clergy at the temples and churches that the women attend, as well as co-workers and supervisors. So it's important that we work with all of these groups while we work with the women and men at the factory. Next slide, please. As Whitney mentioned, we will be working with sustainability partners. It was quite serendipitous that in the case of Nepal, several sustainability partners emerged during our scoping visit as well as formative research from the government as well as private sectors. The Federation of Women Entrepreneurs Association of Nepal is one of our sustainability partners and includes 5,000 women-owned companies. Next slide, please. Before we end, we would like to thank our research participants, including the women and men at Shangri-La Carpets, the ownership and leadership at the Carpet Factory, who have welcomed us with open arms, the Washfells team, USAID, Nepal, and Washington, D.C., and our colleagues at Iris Group. Back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Mineshka. It's really exciting to be able to present this to everyone here. As we all know, and Lisa also mentioned at the start that Menstrual Hygiene Day, this theme is it's time for action, and we've been so excited to share the details of this project to you all and to the world, and this being our own call to action and those of our partners and efforts in this space. And we're really curious to hear about your efforts as well. So please do include in the chat while we wrap up this session with some question and response. While we're doing that, please do include the efforts that you're involved in our chat section. Please do engage in that platform and include your name, email, and organization so we can stay in contact moving forward. We have had a few really interesting questions come in, and we've grouped a couple of them together. Firstly, and continue to bring the questions in, please. Firstly, we were asked, what evidence is there relating to the effects of menstrual leave on women's advancement? Perhaps figures or evidence on economic impacts of poor MHM at the workplace on businesses related to profits or increased costs. I'll pass that on to DT to respond to.
Thanks so much, Whitney. I'll take them one at a time. So in terms of the evidence relating to the effects of menstrual leave on women's advancement, as I mentioned, there's very little evidence from impact evaluations on improving MHM and the downstream consequences on women's economic outcomes. The evidence is really from the HER project, to our knowledge, and that does not show any impacts on advancement, though we hypothesize that that might be true, that if improved MHM does really improve women's performance at work, that there's a logical consequence on their ability to advance in the organization as well. That hasn't been validated in the literature, partially I think because of the short duration of most evaluations and most programs. So that has yet to be elucidated. In terms of the second question, the figures and evidence of the economic impact of poor MHM on businesses. So I focused on the impacts on women. But yes, results from the HER program do show economic benefits for the businesses as well, relating principally to lower staff turnover and fewer errors and less missed days of work. So I advise you to consult the evaluation reports from the HER project for further details on that.
Aditi, I'm going to keep you on. There was another question about whether the study checked any policies that provide tax exemption for MHM products.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We did not look at it during our literature review because we focused our frame on experiences in the workplace, but recognizing that's an important factor in the broader policy environment. And we are considering that during our scoping trips to each of the countries, and then in our formative research as well. And we'll be addressing that or considering that as part of the intervention.
And then I'll pitch you one more, Aditi, and then we'll move on to Mineshka. There was a question about what influenced the decision to focus on these 4 countries that we had, specifically whether or not other countries that might have high numbers of women working in textile supply chains would have been considered.
Yeah, great question. We put out a call to USAID missions that were interested in participating, recognizing that these issues are critical in textile manufacturing chains as well as in other workplaces as well. And we chose the countries based on an overlap of where there's need along with where there's interest. And so that's dictated the country choices. And the last criteria is that we also wanted some geographic representation around the globe, recognizing, of course, that 4 limits our ability to do that.
Great, thank you, Aditi. Maneshka, there's a question that I'd like to put forward to you, asking about related findings towards men's attitudes as barriers and/or supporters, and how we plan to engage them, particularly in Nepal. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure, thank you. That's an excellent question. In Nepal, as we discussed earlier, there is this culture of silence that sort of guides the discussion around menstrual hygiene. That culture of silence is slowly being broken. You can see that even today there were a lot of events that were publicly held in Nepal to commemorate MH Day, and there is an engagement that's taking place with the men in society. It really largely depends on what part of society we're talking about, whether they're the elite, the educated elite men have little to no problem discussing menstrual hygiene. However, the slightly lower educated, low-income folks, very many of them that we spoke with, both men and women, said that this was the first time they were even having a conversation around menstrual hygiene. So the onus is really on us to engage the men at the factory that we're going to be working at. This is also another reason why engaging the clergy is so important, so that the clergy can be then leveraged to engage the men and the women.
Thanks so much, Maneshka. I'll keep you on now. There was a question about can you please present on the status of low-cost sanitary pad products and those that are locally produced, and the credibility of those products, testing the efficacy and safety of their use. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yes, this is a fantastic question. We were really surprised to learn that in the case of Nepal, there are several companies that are taking the lead on developing disposable sanitary pads that are biodegradable. Part of the reason for this is that the government has issued that they would like to move towards biodegradable pads and reusables. And so while the rest of the world, we're still a little bit behind with 10% of our pads only being biodegradable in that 180-day period. In the case of Nepal, there is a company named Sarda Group, which is producing 70 to 90% biodegradable pads. And there's also a major push to use reusable pads, especially during this COVID time. The 90% biodegradable pad is going to be ISO certified. It's taking a little bit longer because of COVID. There's also been a huge reduction in the taxes on locally manufactured pads. So the raw materials are being taxed less as they're coming into the country, and the end product is also being taxed much less than it used to be.
Thanks, Maneshka. If along those same lines, there was a question about how COVID-19 is changing menstrual supply chains across countries that we're working in, and you alluded to that just now in your response, Maneshka. I wonder if you can say a bit more about what we're seeing in Nepal.
Sure.
What you're hearing on the ground.
Around the time that we were doing our formative research in Nepal, we were talking to several sanitary pad manufacturers, and they all were saying to us that they used to get their raw materials from China, and because of COVID-19, they'd had to switch suppliers, and the cost of the raw materials was much higher, even 20% higher in some cases. And so this is definitely going to affect the cost of the end product. In the case of Nepal, the locally produced products sell for about 40 rupees to 70 rupees, depending on the quality, Nepali rupees. And nonetheless, it is still cost prohibitive to certain income groups in Nepal. The imported pads coming in from mostly India can be bought for about 550 to 6 rupees a piece. But we're not sure how, depending on how long COVID will last, whether we'll be able to get raw materials into the country. I have heard reports of a lot of women moving towards reusable sanitary napkins, especially in Kathmandu.
Great. Thank you so much, Manashka. There were a couple of questions around pain management and how pain management would be addressed within the study, the action research, and I wonder, Manashka, if you could also tackle that one in terms of how you're approaching pain management in the proposed intervention in Nepal, and then we can potentially pass it back to Aditi if you have anything to add from the literature.
Sure. For the physiology and pain issues related to menstruation, we're actually going to be working with a medical consultant who is the head of gynecology at Kathmandu University. And so she's going to be working directly with the staff at the factory on pain management issues. And I think she will work with them on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, great. So many great questions coming in, everyone. Thank you so much. This is really exciting. As we continue to sort through some of the ones that recently came in, I want to address some questions about sustainability. There was a question about how we can guarantee sustainability after production starts. And there's another question about whether or not a year-long intervention will provide adequate information to understand the economic implications on women. As we discussed in the presentation, we are really excited about some of the sustainability partners that we're finding in our countries in Nepal that have been solidified, in Kenya that are coming together, and how these partners can hopefully carry forward some of the learnings that we provide and glean, and not just the learnings, but possibly the policies and the different benefits that we see on the ground, and how those can actually gain traction within these partners, and how they can transfer that to their, whether it's a business association, as I mentioned, to their members, or even to foundations or NGOs who are looking for ways to spread this so that it can hopefully grow. And I'm linking that to this question about how an intervention could provide the information that we need. We're really positive and hopeful about the data that we'll gain from a one-year intervention, and our CBA especially to draw on some of that. And then, as I mentioned, in terms of how it fits into the sustainability package, that can be a start of further effort down the road, and hopefully this can be added to the body of literature to grow and to scale this in the future. So we're excited about this particular time frame being a start in something that will hopefully grow. So through our sustainability partners and others who are also eager to pick this up. Let's see, we had a question about, I'm just conscious of the time. I wonder if all these questions are so helpful for us to think about, and we appreciate the the suggestions as well that are coming in, please do continue to put those in the chat and put your name and email and organization that you're working in. I think that unfortunately we need to wrap up. I would encourage all of you to stay in touch with us as well. Do connect with us. Our email addresses are in the PowerPoint, which is in the handout attached, as well as the desk review in a handout. Our Twitter handle is @IrisGroupINTL. Please do follow us in our work there. I think I need to hand it over now. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'd like to hand over to Sylvia Cabas, Senior Gender Advisor at the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Economic Empowerment at USAID. Sylvia will say a few words before closing our time together. So thanks so much, everyone, and over to you, Sylvia.
Thanks so much, and thanks to the research team for such a great, thought-provoking presentation, and to Lisa for her always skillful moderation. This research is a valuable contribution to the agency's work on women's economic empowerment, as well as the overall body of literature on MHM. The report is a natural extension of and complements the tremendous work done on MHM in the context of Washington schools. Today's presentation also concretely demonstrates that MHM is a cross-cutting issue with real implications for women's participation in public life, and thus for how we design and implement activities to promote women's empowerment in general. This is increasingly crucial as we promote women in non-traditional but more remunerative fields like STEM, and still important in venues where women often predominate, like public markets. Much of the presentation confirmed that what we already know anecdotally, that in many workplaces, the MHM infrastructure is inadequate and consequently workplace conditions are detrimental to women's overall well-being, and probably to men's as well. I'd especially like to highlight that I was glad to see a discussion of social norms. This definitely builds upon Dr. Saoirse Sood's work on social norms in MHM in schools, and also our own efforts as an agency to address social and gender norms, such as in the Passages Project. I was also happy to hear about the environmental impact of MHM, especially in terms of disposal, as an area that we need to explore further. We have a couple of initial experiences with USAID partners using small-scale on-site incineration facilities, in India with biomass controls in a factory setting, and in Malawi with Save the Children at a school. But of course, this isn't feasible everywhere. I'm also glad to hear a bit about the psychological impact due to the lack of appropriate MHM, especially since sanitation-related psychosocial stress is an emerging field. As we close, I'd like to leave everyone with a couple of questions for reflection. As more women move into leadership and management, will workplace MHM improve? We have a precedent in the experience of lactation rooms where a critical mass of women, especially at mid and senior levels, were able to advocate for safe and secure breastfeeding and pumping facilities. Because of the Chapouty issue, Nepalese were already discussing MHM at a national level. How can a development community help build awareness of MHM at the national level in other countries? Thanks again to the research team, to WashPals, to Lisa, and to most of all to you, the audience, for a great presentation and discussion.